Alright guys, welcome to today's video. What I'm going to go over today is how to get a Google Earth image into 3dsmax, at least one way to do it, and then model objects off of that Earth image. So I've got Google Earth pulled up here, and I'm going to be working on the main grandstand at Texas Motor Speedway. Needs updating. The default Pyrus grandstand is actually cut off right here and right here. So it's missing that entire section and that entire section. I found it easier to just go ahead and build it from scratch than try to edit what was there. You'll find that in most cases. So I just typed in Texas Motor Speedway. It brought me to here, obviously. I've already done this off camera so I could get a large enough higher resolution image than what you can see here on this preview. Opened up Photoshop, got that higher resolution image as a flat image. There's no layers or anything. Saved it as a BMP file on the desktop. That's all. I'm going to go ahead and open up 3dsmax here. And if you already know how to use 3dsmax, this is going to be a basic review for you. Most of it is what I'm going to go over is just how to get started. So again, if you already know what you're doing, this part can be skipped. But we're going to get that Earth image onto a plane. I know you can use it as a background image, but I prefer to use it as a plane. So I'll go over some of the basics here. The first thing that you always want to do when working with 3dsmax, and this is 2013, is go to Customize Unit Setup and make sure you're on metric meters. You can see that you can change that here. Make sure you're on meters, and you also want to go to 1 unit equals 1 meter. If you open up a render scene or something like that and it asks you to adopt the scene's unit setup, make sure that you always leave it as system unit setup, which will retain that, or make sure you always remember to go back and change it back to meters. 1 unit equals 1 meter. All of the conversion tools use that setup as their expected input. So if it's different, may or may not have issues with scaling. If you use that setup and model it to the correct size, it will be that size in the game. That's a general rule of thumb for most games that I know of. So that was under Customize Unit Setup. What you're looking at is many tools that you will not be using and a few good ones that you will be using. I am by no means an expert at this program, so there are things that you're going to find from other tutorial videos that will help you a lot more than what I'm helping. This is just the basics. We're going to use graphite modeling tools in polygon mode. You're also looking at different viewports here. Default view as workspace as you load it up. This is what you're probably going to be looking at. I typically work with perspective and orthographic views. I typically only work with this viewport down here. I can change that up here as well if I wanted it to be up here. I prefer using it down there. If I want to make any one of these bigger, I can go ahead and hit maximize viewport. So I'll select this one with the yellow box around it. I'll maximize it and it will take up the entire workspace there. That's typically how I work on things. I may use the other views occasionally for alignment, but this is mainly what you're going to be working with. So some of the tools, the basic tools that you'll be using is Select Object, which is click on that object and it will select it. Selection tool, left click, hold the mouse button down, just like Windows. I mean, most of the stuff in this is just like using Windows operating system. We'll go over to Select and Move. That will select an object and bring up the gizmo, and I'll show you that in here in a second. Select the object and rotate it. and then select the object and scale it. You also have snaps toggle and angle snap toggle. A couple others that I've never used before, so that's probably covered in some other tutorial videos that might help you. Over here on the right hand side, you've got a series of tabs here: create, modify, hierarchy, motion, display, and utilities. Then you've got shapes, geometry, lights, cameras, helpers, space warps. Under create geometry, you have a rollout here where you can select different things to create. Standard primitives is what you're going to be working with most usually. So let's go ahead and create a plane. So we're going to click plane, and it's going to be a flat surface. That's all it is. So I'm going to go anywhere here in the middle, left click, drag while holding the mouse button. I've now created a plane. See, I can move this anywhere I want. I'm going to go ahead and just put it there. To start with, I'm going to start with about 500 width and 250 length. The other thing you need to pay attention to is segments. Now what that will do is divide that up into segments and create unnecessary vertices or points in the middle of this plane. We don't need that. So I'm going to change that to 1, 1 over here on the segments. I'm going to go anywhere in the viewport. I'm going to right click. And you can see the gizmo pops up in the center of that plane. If I use the mouse wheel to zoom out, that gizmo will always pop up in the center. You can see it's kind of faded out. It's still there, but if I go to select and move, and what I can do is I can mouse highlight over any combination of these three axes here. So if I want to move it only on the X, I can go this way. I can hit Control Z to undo that. If I want to select the X and Y, you can see the height value doesn't move. And the numbers that I'm looking at are down here at the bottom, the X, Y, Z. If I want to move it on the Y and Z, I can highlight that. You can see the X doesn't move. Same thing over here. X and Z move, but Y does not. To start with, I want to move this to 0, 0, 0. So I can manually just type in 0, and you can see it automatically fills out the 0.0 meters. The other thing that you need to pay attention to down here is if it happens to have a negative number, and you select it, and you hit backspace, and that negative sign is still there, whatever you enter is going to be a negative number still. Sometimes you'll have to hit backspace twice. So just pay attention to that when you're moving things around. So we've got this plane at 0, 0, 0. So we need to get the texture applied to it, and we also need to scale it. We'll scale it after we get the texture applied, and I'll show you why here in just a second. So I'm going to select it. You can see it's got the bounding box around it. I'm going to bring up the material editor by hitting M on the keyboard. See, the material editor pops up. I can move this window anywhere I want to. Because this plane is not what I'm trying to get into game, it's just a modeling tool that I'm using to help model the grandstand, I'm actually going to apply that texture to the second one. So you see up here, top left is number 1, the one next to it is number 2, so I'm going to select this one to apply that texture to, because before we export the entire grandstand, we're going to delete all of this. It's just there to help us model, that's all it's doing. It's not what we're actually going to use in game. So I'm going to make my material for that on number 2. So I've got that selected, it's got the white bounding box around it. I'm going to go down here to diffuse. I'm going to depress this little button right here. And you see it brings up this window. I'm going to double click on bitmap. And I'm going to go up to the desktop, which is already there. There's the Earth image that I saved as a bitmap earlier. You can see it's wrapped around that sphere now. It's not on the plane yet. We need to apply it to the plane. I can either click this and drag it over here, or I can hit this button here that says assign material to selection as long as it's selected. So I'm going to hit that. You can see it changed, but it's not that image yet. So if I depress this button here that says show shaded material in viewport, now the texture shows up. Obviously that is not scaled correctly, but it has the image on it. This is the other viewport tool here up at the upper right. I can grab this box and move around. Typically that is pointed at 0.00, so it will move around that. The other tool that you can use to rotate the camera, and it can help when you're working way out here off of 0. Sometimes the camera will get screwed up. You can hit Control R, and now that gizmo will rotate around the center axis of the selection. What I'm going to do to show you there is right click, convert to editable poly. Excuse me, editable poly. You can see that it changes over here to editable poly. I'm going to click that plus sign. You can now see that there are 4 dots, one on each corner. Those are called vertices or vertexes. I can drag select one, I can actually click on it, or I can drag click on it. That's left mouse button to drag. I can select multiple. And it's similar to selecting files in Windows. I can just left click on one, hold the control button, and then click on another. You can see that both of those are selected. I can keep doing that if I want to. Add them one by one, just like you're selecting files in a Windows folder. If I select this vertex over here and I do Control R on the keyboard, it now rotates around that point instead of 0, 0. See that 0, 0 is actually moving, but that point is not. That can help if you're doing a complex model and you're working out over here away from 0, 0. Just hit that Control R and it will rotate around that point. Also helps if you're zoomed in. 2 other things that you're going to use a lot is this hand tool, which you can grab the scene. You can see the icon change to a hand. Now grab the scene and move it. If you get to a point where you're really zoomed in with the mouse wheel, you can see that it's moving really slowly. Click the button next to that hand, and that will change your field of view. I want to zoom out, but you still want to zoom into that amount of detail. Right click to cancel that, and you can see it's that amount of detail. You're that zoomed in, but you can still move it quickly. I believe if you hit the Z button, it will zoom to extents back to 0, 0. Yes. Okay. So we've got our Google Earth image on a plane. We need to scale it correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another polygon. Sorry, we're going to create another plane that is a certain measurement. Now we need to pick something on that Earth image, and I just click the ruler tool and I measure a point there. I come to 491. Let's actually zoom in a little bit. I believe that's kind of short. Let me see. I'm at 493.58. I want to round that off to 493.5. That is plenty of accuracy for what we're doing. So we go back to 3dsmax. We're going to create a new plane. We're still on one length segment, one width segment. Generally speaking, that will stay the same for each session of 3dsmax, so next time you start it up, that may change back to 4. I'm sure there's a way to change that, what the default is. But we're going to click a new plane here and drag that to 493.5. So enter that information in there. And we're going to make that 20 meters tall. And everything's good there. We're measuring the grass, so I'll make that green so it's easy to see. The other thing that is going to happen here, if we go to rotate this, I can click anywhere inside that sphere, move it any direction. Control Z to undo. I can highlight this axis, so I'm rotating it on the ground. Control Z to undo, and grab it that way and flip it that way. I can rotate it this way. And you see that top left number there, the yellow number is changing. It is extremely difficult to get it precisely to 90 degrees. Near impossible, to be honest. So I'm going to undo that. What I'm going to go up here and do is select Angle Snap Toggle. You'll see that when I do it now, it changes by 5-degree increments, so it's a whole lot easier to get to 90 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and move that to 0, 0. Again, see that dash negative sign is still there. Make sure that's gone. Okay, so there's our first measurement. Now, that is the measurement. So I want to select the original plane, not the new one. I want to go to scale. Same thing with the gizmo. I can scale the entire thing. I can scale on the Y, or I can scale on the X. Obviously I want to do it on the X axis, so if I grab that with the left mouse button and drag it, you'll see that it goes only on that axis. So what we'll do is we'll get this lined up. I'm actually going to move this plane over just a little bit there. So back on the Earth image, go back to scale. Alright, you can see we're pretty close there. If you'll notice, the green plane is creating a shadow. And let's make sure that that is barely going through the ground, yes. You'll see over here it's creating a shadow on that Earth image. I want to get rid of that, so I can go up here, left click, and go to shaded. Now that shadow has disappeared. Realistic is basically just to help you kind of see what it looks like in 3D. It's got some very basic lighting applied to it. Not always helpful, as you can see. I'll zoom in. Make sure we can see the gizmo up here. And I want to move that over. That is pretty darn close. Let's check the other end. Actually see that we're just a little bit off this way. So let's move it that way. We're looking on this end. That's acceptable. That's well within a meter. So we've got our scale that way. You can see that it's also too skinny the other way. So we'll go back to Google Earth. And we'll get our measurement from the start finish line to there. Again, just picking a random point that I know is going to be easy to see on here as well as max. So we're at 46.94. We'll make that 47 meters. And we'll go back to max and we'll create another plane. Double click to change the color. Different color green. So that was 47. You see it automatically fills in the rest of the information for you. Go ahead and make that 15 meters tall. Actually, I did that backwards. So go 47 this way, 15 meters tall. There we go. And we'll rotate that up. We've got the angle snap turned on. 90 degrees. Actually, go ahead and turn that off. That can cause issues with other things if you're not paying attention to it. So go here in the center. Make sure we're on the Earth image, and we'll scale it only in the Y direction this time. Okay. That's actually perfect right there. And we'll move this over. So we've got our Google Earth image in Max set up, scaled correctly, well within half a meter of what it should be. So at this point, we'll go ahead and delete those measurement polygon or those planes. Make sure you're on the actual plane, not the Earth image. We want that one to stay behind. At this point, it's a good idea to go ahead and save as, and that would be Earth image. You can see I've already had one set up, but that's our base scene with our flat plane set up. We'll go ahead and make sure this is still centered. And we'll click the top there and it'll rotate for us. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to start with the Grandstand object. Obviously it's going to be a separate object with a separate texture. We've already left space for it. When building grandstands, I find it easiest to start with a box. So we'll just out here left click, that's drawing the base of the box, and then you let go and it will let you create the height. So we'll left click again. We're going to set the height to 15, and that's a good start. So we'll right click to end creation, go ahead and right click on that box, editable poly. Now that's a 6-sided box. There are several faces that we don't need. We'll go ahead and polygon, and the first thing we'll do is delete the bottom of it. So now it's a 5-sided box. You can see through the bottom. Obviously the ground is going to be down there, so there's no reason to have that there. We don't need the back, and we don't need this side. So I'm just hitting delete, I'm selecting the polygon, and then I'm hitting delete on the keyboard. So now you can see we have a box. If I go to vertex, you can see that if I drag select that, it's actually going to select the top and the bottom vert there. Change that color so you can see it easier. Make that yellow. You can see that those two corner verts are now selected. What I want to do is move this box over, so I'm on the X and Y axis, and I'm moving it over here. Get this over here where I can work on it. And I want to go to top left of the viewport, left click, hold, select orthographic. That eliminates the skewing that you get from perspective view. Hopefully you can see that those vertices are now perfectly lined up and down. They were perfectly lined up in perspective view, but they were being drawn with a little bit of warping from the camera. So if you're in an orthographic view, you can see that those dots are perfectly over top of each other, exactly as they are. So I'm simply going to move these over where they should be. Keeping in mind that you're working with straight lines. Actually, it's in the wrong place. It's for the tower, so we'll move it back here. Just dragging, selecting. You can see that that creates a straight line there where that has a little bit of curve. Obviously, we can't put that many vertices in a single object. I find that the limit is somewhere around 300 to 400 polygons. That is 3 polygons. We'll go back to perspective. 1, 2, 3. 3 polygons selected there. If I go back to the top, orthographic, vertex. So you can see that's how you basically start it. Actually, let's go back to perspective real quick. It's obviously still a box, so what I want to do is drag select that, hit the left control button, drag select that one. I want to lower those down to about 2 meters to create that wedge shape. That's a decent start for a grandstand. The height values are going to be a guess. If you have an existing object that you can get that height value data from, absolutely use that. Obviously, if it looks correct, use it. If you don't have an existing object available, you're going to have to do some detective work and some educated guessing. You can look at multiple photographs of any object that's real in the real world that there's photographs of, obviously, and look for objects in that picture that you know the height of. If you're working on a building, generally speaking, you're going to be able to find the height of an average door, or the height of an average window, or things like that, and then you can extrapolate heights based on educated guesses. So how do I get from this point to a completed object? I'm not going to do that here in this video, but different selection tools available over here. Vertex, obviously, we've covered. You can select each point separately. If I got an edge, I can actually select that edge. Hopefully you can see that it just highlighted the edge of that face right there. If I want to create a polygon off of that edge, let's make sure you can see. If I just grab it and start moving it, it actually warps the entire object. So Control Z to undo that. Select that edge. Hold down the right shift button on the keyboard. Now I can pull a polygon off of that edge. So you can kind of see the process. It just created a new polygon off of that edge right there. So I go to that vertex and just go around and start lining that up to where I want. I can do this from the top-down view. It only created off of that edge, so you can see that there's no front edge. So after I get that part set up, I'd go back on each one of these fronts, holding the right shift and just on the Z-axis, bring that down and just put it at 0. You can see that it created that front edge for me. Typically I would do that after creating the entire top area. So I'll just do a couple more here so you can see. This is a process very similar to how car models are made. They'll use, obviously, pictures of cars instead of Earth images, obviously. So that's the general process of how you create that. And again, you would go back and hit Edge. Select that edge, shift. Excuse me. Only selecting the Z-axis while holding shift allows you to bring that down. I bring it to a point just above 0, let go shift, input 0 into the z-axis there, click somewhere else, and then it automatically sets that edge to 0. And I believe that's going to cover the basic modeling techniques in this video. Getting the object into the game I'm going to do in another video, so look for that shortly. Other than that, thanks for watching.